$410 billion. That is the number the cement industry extracts from the global economy every single year. And every cent of it depends on one assumption you have never questioned, that the only way to turn loose earth into something solid is to buy what they sell. Your contractor believes it. Your architect believes it. The building codes your city enforces were written around it. You have spent your entire life inside structures that exist because someone paid for Portland cement, paid for the mixer, paid for the truck to idle in the driveway at $90 an hour, and you never once asked whether the transaction was necessary. Because why would you? The answer was settled before you were born, except it wasn't. In 2025, researchers at a German university measured the compressive strength of a material produced by a biological reaction that requires no kiln, no energy grid, no supply chain. The number came back above 50 megapascals. To put that in terms your wallet understands, the standard concrete holding up the ceiling above your head right now sits below that threshold. The biological product is not comparable. It is not in the same range. It is stronger. You have been paying for something that nature does for free, not approximately free, not cheap, point free, zero material cost, zero energy cost. Here is where the timeline gets uncomfortable. September 17th, 1683. A Dutch cloth merchant named Antony van Leeuwenhoek scraped plaque from his own teeth, pressed it under a handmade lens smaller than a thumbnail, and wrote to the Royal Society of London describing tiny living creatures no human eye had ever detected. He called them animalcules. What he was actually looking at, without the vocabulary to name it, were bacteria. The same class of microorganisms that modern researchers have now confirmed can flood a pile of ordinary sand with urine and convert it into load-bearing waterproof stone in under 7 days. The biological engine was identified in 1683. That is not an oversight. That is a pricing structure. You are not paying for concrete because concrete is the only option. You're paying for concrete because an industry worth nearly $500 billion annually has made sure the alternative never appears in a hardware store aisle, never shows up in a construction guide, never gets whispered by a contractor standing in your unfinished basement. The knowledge was there before the industry, and the evidence is not buried in some fringe laboratory. Archaeologists excavating Roman construction sites have documented it for decades. Sections of Roman earthworks near ancient sanitation pits and waste channels show a density and hardness that was always attributed to mechanical compaction, to the sheer tonnage of empire pressing down over millennia. But when researchers at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore ran the chemistry in 2022, the truth surfaced. Those hardened zones are saturated with calcium carbonate, the exact crystalline compound produced when soil bacteria metabolize urea. The Romans did not know what was happening. A healthy adult excretes between 25 and 30 grams of urea every single day. That is not a rounding error. That is not a trace residue you need a lab to detect. That is a measurable, harvestable volume of one of the most biochemically reactive compounds your body will ever produce, and you flush it into municipal sewage without a second thought. Meanwhile, a bag of Portland cement costs you money, costs the atmosphere carbon, and costs the supply chain diesel. Your body hands you the precursor to stone for free every morning, every night, on a schedule more reliable than any delivery truck. Now here is where the numbers get violent. Researchers at a German university, publishing in 2025, took technical-grade urea, flushed it through sand packed into molds over a 3-day window, and measured the compressive strength of what came out the other side, 50 megapascals. Say that number out loud, because it matters. Standard residential concrete, the stuff holding up your foundation walls, your garage slab, your front porch, typically lands between 20 and 40 megapascals. Standard paving concrete sits around 30. The biocemented sand blocks produced by bacteria, urea, and a calcium source were sitting above the ceiling of that entire range. No heat source, no heavy rotating drum, no Portland cement whatsoever. The mechanism is not mysterious once you strip away the silence that has been wrapped around it. Certain bacteria, species of Bacillus, Sporus arsena, and their close relatives produce an enzyme called urease. Urease cracks urea molecules apart into 2 outputs, ammonia and carbonate ions. The ammonia pushes the local pH upward. The carbonate ions, the instant they encounter calcium, and calcium is one of the most common minerals in ordinary soil, precipitate into calcium carbonate, crystalline, dense, insoluble in water, permanent. The exact same compound that forms limestone, the exact same compound that forms marble, the exact same compound that has been building geological formations for 4 billion years. What the bacteria accomplish is compressing a geological timeline, millions of years of mineral deposition into days. They colonize the contact points between individual sand grains, crack the urea, and grow crystal bridges, grain by grain by grain until what was loose Pourable, shapeless sand becomes a rigid, interlocking matrix chemically identical to natural calcareous sandstone. Now, the industry will point at one number and hope it discredits everything. With real human urine rather than purified technical urea, compressive strength drops to around 5 megapascals. They want you to hear that and walk away. Do not walk away. 5 megapascals is harder than unfired clay brick. It is comparable to compressed earth construction. It is enough to build walls, enough to stabilize slopes, enough to solidify loose ground beneath a footing, enough to create load-bearing pads, and the input cost is zero. Not subsidized, not discounted. Zero. Your body manufactures the feedstock around the clock, whether you use it or not. Think about what that means from a pure cost of materials standpoint. The cement industry extracts $410 billion annually, selling you a powder that requires limestone quarries, our 250-degree kilns, and 8% of global carbon emissions to produce. Your kidneys produce the alternative on autopilot. The gap between those two realities is not a gap in science. It is a gap in who controls the information pipeline between a laboratory and your job site. NTU Singapore confirmed the same fundamental chemistry in 2022, combining urea sourced from mammalian urine with calcium-rich industrial waste to produce biocement strong enough for real-world structural trials. Not a whiteboard theory. Not a conference poster gathering dust. Functional material, tested under load, documented in peer-reviewed literature, and still absent from every contractor bid you have ever received. The numbers do not lie, and they do not need your belief to remain true. They just need you to stop ignoring what your own body has been offering you every single day since the day you were born. Portland cement exists because someone figured out how to insert themselves between you and a chemical reaction that nature already performs for free. Limestone gets crushed, heated past 150 degrees Celsius in kilns that never stop spinning, and the powder that comes out the other end gets bagged, branded, trucked to a store, and sold to you at $18 a pop. Every cubic yard your contractor pours runs you $150 minimum. That is not the cost of the material. That is the cost of a supply chain designed to make itself indispensable. Now zoom out. LafargeWholcim.Cemex.Heidelberg. Materials.Ultratech. These are not construction companies. They are toll booth operators. They sit between calcium carbonate and your foundation slab, and they collect at every single checkpoint along the way. The quarry, the kiln, the grinding mill, the distribution hub, the branded bag, the delivery fleet, the trained applicator who tells you this is the only way it can be done. Billions of dollars in annual revenue built on one premise and one premise only, that turning out calcium into solid structure requires their industrial process to exist. Biocementation does not threaten their product. It threatens their premise, and that distinction matters more than anything else in this conversation. You cannot own urea. Your body excretes 25 to 30 grams of it every day, whether you want it to or not. You cannot patent calcium carbonate precipitation because it is a chemical inevitability when urease meets urea in the presence of calcium ions. You cannot patent the bacteria performing the reaction because they have been living in topsoil since before the first human civilization poured its first foundation. There is no raw material to monopolize. There is no kiln to finance over 3 decades of debt. There is no branded product to mark up 400% and place on a shelf between the joint compound and the grout. That is not a technical problem for the cement industry. That is an existential one. Because the moment a process requires no proprietary input, no centralized manufacturing, no exclusive supply chain, the toll booth disappears. And when the toll booth disappears, so does the $410 billion valuation. So does the projected $650 billion by 2034. So does every quarterly earnings call built on the assumption that human beings will keep paying for a thermal process when a biological one sits in the soil outside their door. The academic literature tells you everything you need to know about who benefits from your ignorance. Hundreds of peer-reviewed papers on microbially induced calcium carbonate precipitation, field trials on multiple continents, earthquake-resistant soil stabilization, desert erosion control, coastal infrastructure in Singapore, degraded rock carving restoration in China, compressive strengths above 50 megapascals, documented and replicated by university labs in Germany. The science is not fringe. It is not speculative. It is not waiting for some breakthrough. It has been ready since the 1990s. And not one major construction materials company has brought a single consumer-facing product to market based on it. Not one. No bacteria supplement on a hardware store shelf, no DIY biocementation kit next to the bags of Quikrete. No mainstream home improvement show has ever demonstrated the process on camera. That silence is not an oversight. It is a balance sheet decision. When your business model depends on being the only path between raw material and finished structure, you do not advertise the existence of a free alternative. You do not fund its commercialization. You do not lobby for its inclusion in building codes. You let the papers accumulate in journals that contractors never read, and you keep the kilns burning, and you keep the trucks rolling, and you keep collecting $150 per cubic yard from people who never learned that the bacteria in their garden soil were already doing the same job for nothing. This is the value split they never explain to you. On one side, an industrial process that demands energy at an almost incomprehensible scale releases 2.5 billion metric tons of CO2 into the atmosphere every year, just from the chemical reaction alone, and funnels profit to a handful of multinational corporations at every node of a chain you cannot bypass. On the other side, a biological process that requires soil bacteria you already have, urea your body already produces, and calcium ions already present in the ground beneath your feet. One side needs you dependent. The other side needs nothing from you at all. The question was never whether biocementation works. The question is, who loses revenue the moment you find out it does? And the answer to that question explains every single year of silence between the first published paper and the moment you are hearing this now. What matters next is whether the biology is actually accessible to someone standing in their own backyard. And the answer starts with what is already living in the most common soil on the planet. Here's the action. Not the philosophy, not the theory, not the vision board version of what you could become if you just believed hard enough. The action, and it starts with a plastic bucket and a bag of sand. Go to any hardware store, any home improvement aisle, any riverbank where coarse mineral sand sits waiting for someone to pick it up. Fill a container. A 5-gallon bucket works, a plastic storage tub works, a wooden mold you knock together from scrap lumber works. Pack the sand in tight. The coarser the grain, the more surface area exists between particles, and the more anchor points the crystals will have when they begin forming. This is not decorative, this is structural. You want the grains pressing against each other like rush hour commuters on a subway platform. Now walk into a pool supply store, look for calcium chloride. It is sold as a water hardness increaser. You will also find it at hardware stores labeled as ice melt. A bag costs $6 to $10 and contains enough material for dozens of experiments. Dissolve roughly 10 grams per liter of warm water. Set it aside. That is your calcium source, the ion donor that will become half of the calcium carbonate crystal, locking your sand grains together permanently. Next, go outside. Scoop healthy garden soil, forest floor soil, anything dark and rich that smells alive. Not clay, not fill dirt from a construction site, living soil. Mix it with water until you have a loose slurry, something that pours but carries visible particulate. This is your bacterial inoculant. The urease-producing organisms already living in that dirt are the engine of this entire process. Set the slurry in a warm spot for 24 hours. You're not manufacturing anything. You're waking up what was already there. Now, the part that makes people uncomfortable and that discomfort is exactly why this has stayed invisible for so long. Collect a liter of fresh urine, 2 to 3% urea by weight, produced by your own body, every single day at zero cost. Mix it in equal parts with your calcium chloride solution. The urea is the feedstock. The calcium chloride is the mineral supply. When the bacteria from your soil slurry contact the urea, they cleave it into carbonate. The carbonate meets the calcium ions and immediately begins precipitating crystals directly onto the grain surfaces inside your packed sand. Pour the soil slurry through the sand first. Let it seep down, distributing bacteria into every pore space between grains. Let it drain. Then begin flushing with your urine calcium mixture. Slow, steady, let it percolate rather than rush through. You are not watering a plant. You are feeding a chemical reaction that needs time to anchor itself at the molecular level. Repeat this flush twice a day, 5 to 7 days. That is the entire commitment. 2 pours a day, each taking less time than brushing your teeth. By day 2, the sand stops flowing freely when you tilt the container. By day 4, you press a finger against the surface and feel resistance where yesterday there was nothing but loose grit. By day 7, what sits in that bucket is no longer sand. It is a block. It holds its shape when you pull the mold away. It resists water. Give it 2 full weeks of curing and you can set weight on it. The color will land somewhere between light beige and warm tan, nearly identical to natural sandstone, because chemically that is almost exactly what it is. For outdoor use, stabilizing a slope that keeps washing out, hardening a footpath that turns to mud every spring, building a foundation pad where no concrete truck can reach. You scale by scaling the inputs. More sand, more inoculant, more flush solution. There is no equipment ceiling, no mixer rental, no curing additive with a $40 price tag. The only constraint is how much area you can keep consistently moist and inoculated during that curing window. For repairs, and this is where it gets genuinely disruptive, you can apply the process directly to existing damage. A crumbling mortar joint, a cracked stone wall, loose aggregate around a fence post that wobbles every time the wind picks up. Wet the damaged zone with your bacterial slurry. Follow with your urine calcium flush. The bacteria migrate into the pore structure of whatever material is already there and begin mineralizing contact points from the inside out. You are not patching over damage with a foreign substance. You are triggering the damaged material to heal itself at the crystal level, bonding new mineral growth directly into the existing matrix. This is the smallest possible version of the action. 1 bucket, 1 bag of pool chemical, 1 scoop of garden dirt, 1 bodily function. You were going to perform anyway. The total cash outlay is under $15, and most of that is the calcium chloride you will not finish for months. Everything else is already sitting in the ground outside your door or running through your own kidneys right now. So here's what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that 6 months from now your bank account will look like a different person's life. I'm not going to promise you passive income streams or financial freedom or any of the vocabulary that gets slapped onto thumbnails by people who make their money selling you the dream of making money. That is not what this is. What this is an exit door. A door you can walk through anytime the weight gets too heavy. Anytime the math stops making sense, anytime your body tells you the stress is not worth the spreadsheet. You are allowed to stop. You are allowed to say this particular vehicle is not mine. That permission does not get offered in most financial content because the moment someone gives you an exit, they lose their recurring viewer, their course buyer, their coaching client. I am giving it to you up front because the only version of this that works long term is the one where you stay because the numbers moved, not because someone guilt-tripped you into consistency. The compounding does not look like anything for the first 90 days. It looks like nothing happened. It looks like you wasted your time. It looks like the people buying options and flipping NFTs and leveraging margin are lapping you while you sit there watching $72 accumulate into what? $400? $500? That is the window where most people quit. That is the window the financial content industry is designed to exploit. Because the moment you feel behind, you buy something. A course, a signal group, a subscription to someone else's conviction, and the compounding resets to zero because the money moved sideways instead of forward. You do not need to beat that window with motivation. You need to beat it with architecture. The transfer is automatic. The account is invisible. The number is small enough that your survival brain does not flag it as a threat. That is the entire system. Not because simplicity is elegant, because simplicity is the only thing that survives contact with a real human life. Where the car breaks down in March, and the dental bill lands in April, and the rent increases in June, and your brain is screaming at you to liquidate everything, just to feel like you have control again. The buffer is not there to make you rich. The buffer is there so that when the next shock hits, and it will hit, you do not get forced into a decision at the worst possible price. You do not sell the position at the bottom. You do not take the predatory loan. You do not sign the lease you cannot afford because the alternative felt like homelessness. The buffer buys you 72 hours of clarity. I'm not building a community here. I'm not launching a membership. I'm leaving a trail of the specific mechanics that the $410 billion industry would prefer you never assemble into a coherent picture. The next one goes deeper into the machinery they built around your paycheck. Subscribe and make sure the algorithm does not bury it beneath another ad for the exact system I just told you to walk away from.